But you got to wonder, what were they thinking? Why would anybody do it this way? It doesn't make any sense to me. Now, as much as my preference is to use traditional joinery techniques as much as possible here in the shop, I recognize that sometimes modern welding really has a place and can be the best choice for a lot of things we make. In particular, I think TIG welding can be a really good match for forge work. It's precise. You can get really nice, delicate welds if you need them. And if you have to forge a piece after welding, it seems like TIG welding holds up better than MIG or stick welding does. But it has been years since I have had a TIG welder in the shop. My current welder would weld TIG if I needed it to, but it's kind of a pain to switch it over to that and then put the MIG gun back on when you need it because it's only got one outlet and you got to refeed the wire every time. So if you just need about 2 or 3 minutes of TIG welding, that's not very convenient. Now recently I reached out to Everlast welders and asked them about a TIG welder, and they agreed to send a machine for us to look at. Now this unit came with a lot of stuff, including some pleasant surprises, such as spare MIG tips. There's 10 0.8 millimeter tips and 10 0.9 millimeter tips. 0.9 is equivalent to the 035 wire that I normally run in my other machine. So since I have a spare roll of wire for that, I can install that in here. It's the smaller roll. It's not the great big 40-pound rolls. It's a more compact roll, but for a machine this size, that's really what you need. Got spare nozzles for the MIG gun. Of course, came with a MIG gun. The TIG torch has a thumb control on it, which I think I'll really like. I never really liked a foot pedal. It was good control, but I'm frequently standing up and not always working in the exact same place. And a foot pedal starts to be a little problematic. So the thumb control, I think, is going to be really nice. But it also has a foot pedal if I decide I want to go with the foot pedal or just get more into TIG welding, and I do need to practice more. Of course, it has a stinger, so you can just stick weld with it. So we'll do all three of those processes: stick, MIG, or TIG. And I'm sure it will also do flux core, although I haven't dug into it that deep. There's a set of TIG nozzles and tips, so you've got different sizes of things to work with here right out of the gate. However, it does not come with any wire or tungsten, so you need to buy those separate. And of course, you need to buy your shielding gas separate. That's not something you're going to get when you buy any welder. That's always a separate deal. Now, in spite of coming with all this stuff, there's one thing that it didn't come with that I'm kind of surprised about. It came with a single regulator intended for the argon or the TIG gas, but it only came with one regulator and one hose. Now it has two inlets. It's got a TIG inlet and a MIG inlet, and it has two outlets, so you can leave the TIG torch connected and the MIG gun connected and just use whichever one you want to use at any given time. But it's only got one regulator and hose for the gas coming in. So if you want to leave it set up with two tanks, two gas sources, both the TIG torch and the MIG gun all the time, you need to buy another regulator and another hose, which really isn't that big a deal. On the other hand, if you're running flux core, you only need one. Since I have TIG welded in the past, I actually have some tungstens on hand, and I have a cylinder of straight argon that I can hook up to this. So I can get this up and running today and see how it works and see if I remember anything about TIG welding, because it has been 10 years at least since I've done any TIG welding. And the MIG gun uses this Euro style connector, and you don't have to take this off at all to hook up the TIG or the stick to these terminals. Well, this welder is a multi-process welder. It'll do stick, it'll do MIG, it'll do TIG. I was most interested in upgrading my welder to switching to something that did TIG more easily, because I haven't been able to do TIG in the shop for quite a while. So that's what I'm going to set this up for my first initial test. Now, any smart person would practice for a week or two before they put this on video. But you're looking at literally the very first TIG weld I've done in probably 10 years. It's a little bit ugly, but with some practice and accepting the fact that I'm going to use a grinder on the finished piece, I think I'm going to be able to live with it. The only way to get better at any of this stuff is to practice, and committing to putting it into a project is a good way to do that. Now I've switched over to the MIG gun. I do MIG weld way more often. So I've got it set up right now with the MIG gun, and I'm welding up a rack that will be used to hold this welder. This is going to hold it up on the wall so it doesn't sit on my bench anymore, and that will be a great big improvement on the functionality and declutter my workbench some. This is certainly not a video about how to build this rack. If you are familiar with fabricating and you're comfortable welding things, I think you can probably figure it out from what little you're going to see in this video. And if you're an experienced fabricator, you can probably come up with some better ideas and do a much better job than I did. But I think this is going to be completely functional, and I kind of like where I'm going with it. It's going to be able to pivot, it's going to be able to swing one way or the other over the bench, and it'll have hangers for the cords, the cables, the hoses, and all that kind of stuff. But since I did want this for TIG, I'm going to go ahead and switch it back to TIG. It just takes a few seconds to switch this over. It's mostly a matter of a change in polarity on the leads. Set it for TIG, make sure your other settings are correct, and you're off and running again. And again, I need a lot of practice with TIG welding. I have not TIG welded in a long time. So while this welder is certainly capable of doing what I would like it to do, I need to improve my skill level. These are pretty ugly welds, or that's not the machine's fault, it's the person's fault. I always tell people I am not a welder, I just happen to own a welder. But I also don't weld on projects that are life safety related, so I don't weld on trailers, cars, bicycle frames, motorcycles, anything like that. It's mostly shop jigs and shop furniture, things of that sort, and I think this little multi-process welder may be the ideal machine in my shop. It does everything I'd want to do. In fact, it probably does a lot more than I'm capable of right now. And my skills can grow as I practice a little bit more, and I'll be able to grow into the ability of this welder more. It's not limited to my current skill level. Of course, there always has to be some sort of a problem with this stuff. Sheared off a bolt. So I'm going to drill that hole a little bit bigger and put a shorter but fatter bolt in so it doesn't go in and hit whatever that first bolt hit. And that should be plenty strong. This thing doesn't weigh a lot, so it's not going to have a lot of weight on this arm, but I'd still rather it be overkill than just barely suitable. I notice some things are a little bit crooked here. That arm doesn't really run straight, and probably it's the mounts on that bracket didn't get welded up right, and that's just a layout issue. And if it bothers me in the long run, I will cut it apart and do it again. But the rack itself, I don't think would need to be redone again. It would just need to be that mounting bracket. And I made this big enough so there's room for not only this welder, but also my plasma cutter. And all of the hoses and leads and stuff hang on this, so they're not going to be draped over the vise or falling all over the workbench. A lot better storage. I'm really going to be happy to have this thing. Well, this thing works pretty well. I think it's going to be just the ticket for my shop. Visually, this thing is really in your face when you walk into the shop, and it's going to take a little bit of getting used to. But it clears off some space on my big bench, and I'll be able to do more things on that bench instead of having a welder and a plasma cutter. And the cables were always just all over the place or hanging on my little vise here because there was not good cable management built into any of that stuff. And here I've got places to hang the cables, and they are out of my way. That plasma cutter lead is so long and so bulky that it was always just falling all over the place. Seems like anytime I did anything on the bench, I had to pick it up and move it over somewhere. So this is a huge improvement on that score. And generally, I'm really happy with the Everlast welder. This did everything I needed to do on this project and allowed me to do some things that I wouldn't normally do, like TIG weld some of this together. I'm excited to have the TIG welding possibilities back in the shop. But the truth is, I still MIG weld most of the time. And the only reason I haven't been TIG welding for the last 10 years or so is because it was just a pain in the neck to set that up and make use of a TIG torch. It's easy to plug the TIG torch in. In fact, I can leave it mostly set up all the time. You do have to swap the electrodes because it's a different polarity than the MIG gun is. But it's not a big deal to do that, and you can leave the MIG gun hooked up the whole time. My other little multi-process welder that I was using, if you wanted to put the TIG torch in, it went where the MIG gun is on it, and you had to pull the wire out, and then you had to refeed wire when you put it back, and it was just too much of a nuisance to be worth doing. This one will be much easier, and I think I'll be more inclined to go for the TIG torch when I think it's the right tool for the job. You know, it did take me a little time to get used to the controls on this. I tried to just kind of wing it and figure it out on my own initially. Finally resorted to reading the owner's manual, which it does not come with an owner's manual. You got to look that up online. Not really a big deal, but it would be nice to have a physical owner's manual. But now that I know how these controls work, it's very intuitive. Once you get the basics, it's obvious what everything else does, and there's no switching from this screen to that screen and down some long contorted menu system. It's pretty straightforward once you figure out how to go where you want to go on the controls. Now right up here at the top, it will tell you the main settings. It's running on 240 volts. It did come with an adapter, so you can plug it into a 120 volt outlet, and then it will adjust its settings so that it knows that it's running on 120. It's right now set for MIG to steel, and it's in power set, which just means I've got this automatic setting here that does some of the thinking for you, or you can set it to manual. Just depends on how you prefer to do that. Even in the power set, you've got some manual controls. Now to change whether you're welding MIG, TIG, stick, whatever, that's this other set of buttons here. Now it has different MIG settings depending on what gas you're working with. It will do aluminum. I think you need a spool gun to do aluminum. I'd have to double check that. It'll do stainless. Then you get into flux core. And it has TIG or stick. So those are all set there. Again, I'm in the power set mode, so it will determine certain things for me, but I can use the knob to change my wire feed or my voltage. If it's not giving me quite the results I want, I can change those things manually. But then we get into these buttons, and this is what confused me initially. This screen is controlled by these two buttons, this screen is controlled by these two buttons, and the corresponding knobs. I can come down and I can get into these other menus and change other things. And I'm not even sure what some of those are. Those are things I've never had on a MIG, had the option of changing on a MIG welder. And then this button changes which menu. I don't know if you can see it scrolling through these different things here. So it's just 3 levels up and down. You scroll down. When you go one more time, it goes back to the top. And the same thing over here. Let's go back to the power set mode. So I can come down here and I can change my wire diameter by turning the knob. I've got 035 wire. I can change my steel thickness. And I go to 1/4 inch because that's what I've been welding. A standard torch. And in imperial units, and you can change that to metric if you'd rather change it to metric. So that's really all there is to it. It's really very simple once you understand what it does. Now something else this welder offers that I never really thought about before is where the wire goes on it. On my other welder, it was on that side of the welder, and when it was on the bench, that means you had to drag the welder out, turn it sideways, which not too big a deal, but there's always stuff in the way that you had to lift it up over, so it was sort of a nuisance. In this one, the wire goes on this side. So it's really easy to access, and especially with this swing out arm, I can position this wherever I want to, so I've got easy access to change this spool of wire. Going to be a piece of cake Don't have to change it very often for the amount I weld it. Spool of wire lasts me at least a year. I do have one significant complaint. Again, it's not a deal breaker, but you got to wonder, what were they thinking? Why would anybody do it this way? It doesn't make any sense to me. The power switch is on the back of the machine, so to power this up, you have to be able to access the back. This arm gives me that ability, no problem at all. I can just reach back there. And if you have it on a portable cart, you probably have the gas tank mounted behind it, and you can do that anyways. But if it was up on the bench over here where I used to have my welder, and I've got this little layout table over on this end, it was a little bit hard to reach that power button. I don't know why they don't just put it on the control panel. That's where every other machine I have has the power switch. I can't imagine a drill press that you got to go around behind the back of it to find the power switch instead of a button on the front of it. Imagine a lathe where you had to bend over to the thing you're working on to turn the power on or something. Doesn't really make any sense to me. Not a big deal. I'll get used to it being back there, but I do find it a little perplexing that they put it there. Anyway, I want to thank Everlast for sending this welder out. They did not pay me for my opinion. They did not provide any talking points or specifics on what I should say about this welder. They just sent the welder out for us to look at, and unless I find some problem with it in the future, this is going to be the only welder in my shop. The other one's been taken down, put in the shipping container. I'm not going to get rid of it right now, but I don't see any reason that I'm going to be getting it back out unless I just need it to take as a portable welder and maybe put flux core in that one and leave this one set up for MIG. Remember, Patreon patrons get early access to the video, and they receive those videos ad-free over on Patreon. But for everybody, thank you for watching. I hope you have time in your day to get out to your shop, make something, stay safe, wear your safety glasses. We'll see you for the next video.